Hello, bruvs. We're back with Perfume, the story of a murderer by Patrick Suskind. Videos. Let's find this, and then we'll find this. Should have been ready for this, but that's the way it goes. Not preparing. Do I need light on this? Probably not. No, does nothing for it. Why is, I see why it's not showing it. Because I have that. Alright, that makes sense.
I've read Perfume by Patrick Suskind about 10 times in my life, and I can't stop reading it. It's like something that's just stationary in my pocket all the time. It just doesn't leave me, and every time I'm bored, like I'm on an airplane or something, I read it over and over again. Because I'm a hypochondriac, and it just affects me. It makes me want to cut my nose off.
What's the book about?
It's about this perfume apprentice in France at the turn of the century, and he...
And that's where I'm going to stop it because I don't want to know the rest of the book. I've heard that video before. I don't know how I came across it, but I've heard it before, and I figured if Kurt Cobain liked this book, it probably would suck. But it turned out that the first two little sections I read were actually pretty good. All right, let's get to it. Three. Father Terrier was an educated man. He had not merely studied theology, but had read the philosophers as well, and had dabbled with botany and alchemy on the side. He had a rather high opinion of his own critical faculties. To be sure, he would never go so far as some who questioned the miracles, the oracles, the very truth of Holy Scripture, even though the biblical text could not, strictly speaking, be explained by reason alone. Indeed, often directly contradicted it. He preferred not to meddle with such problems. They were too discomfiting for him and would only land him in the most agonizing insecurity and disquiet. Whereas to make use of one's reason, one truly needed both security and quiet. What he most vigorously did combat, however, were the superstitious notions of the simple folk, witches and fortune-telling cards, the wearing of amulets, the evil eye, exorcisms, hocus pocus at full moon, and all the other acts that performed. It was really quite depressing. They performed. It was really quite depressing to see how such heathenish customs had still not been uprooted a good 1,000 years after the firm establishment of the Christian religion. What's up, bruv? And most instances of so-called satanic possession or pacts with the devil proved on closer inspection to be superstitious mummery. Of course, to deny the existence of Satan himself, to doubt his power, Terrier could not go so far as that. Ecclesiastical bodies other than one small ordinary monk were assigned the task of deciding about such matters, touching the very foundations of theology. But on the other hand, it was clear as day that when a simple soul, like that wet nurse, maintained that she had spotted a devilish spirit, the devil himself could not possibly have a hand in it. The very fact that she thought she had spotted him was certain proof that there was nothing devilish to be found, for the devil would certainly never be stupid enough to let himself be unmasked by the wet nurse, Jean Bussy, and with their nose no less, with the primitive organ of smell, the basest of the senses, as if hell smelled of sulfur and paradise of incense and myrrh. Myrrh. The worst sort of superstition straight out of the darkest days of paganism, when people still lived like beasts, possessing no keenness of the eye, incapable of distinguishing colors, but presuming to be able to smell blood, to scent the difference between friend and foe, to be smelled out by cannibal giants and werewolves and the Furies, all the while offering their ghastly gods stinking, smoking burnt sacrifices. How repulsive. The fool sees with his nose rather than his eyes, they say, and apparently the light of God, given reason, would have to shine yet another 1,000 years before the last remnant of such primitive beliefs were banished. Ah, yes, and you poor little child, innocent creature, lying in your basket and slumbering away with no notion of the ugly suspicions raised against you. The impudent woman dared to claim you don't smell the way human children are supposed to smell. Well, what do we have to say to that? Poopy doo. Poopy doo. And he rocked the basket gently on his knees, stroking the infant's head with his finger and repeating, Poopy doo. From time to time, an expression he thought had a gentle, soothing effect on small children. You're supposed to smell like caramel. What nonsense. Poopy doo. After a while, he pulled his finger back, held it under his nose, and sniffed, but could smell nothing except the chow crout he had eaten at lunch. Okay, I don't know chow crout, but yeah, he hesitated a moment, looked around him to make sure no one was watching, lifted the basket, lowered his fat nose into it. Expecting to inhale an odor, he sniffed all around the infant's head, so close to it that the thin, reddish baby hair tickled his nostrils. He did not know exactly how babies' heads were supposed to smell. Certainly not like caramel. That much was clear, since caramel was melted sugar, and how could a baby that until now had drunk only milk smell like melted sugar? It might smell like milk, like wet nurse's milk, but it didn't smell like milk. It might smell like hair, like skin and hair, and maybe a little bit of baby sweat. And Terrier sniffed with the intention of smelling skin, hair, and a little baby sweat, but he smelled nothing. For the life of him, he couldn't. Apparently, an infant has no odor, he thought. That must be it. An infant, assuming it is kept clean, simply doesn't smell any more than it speaks or walks. Or writes. Such things come only with age. Strictly speaking, human beings first emit an odor when they reach puberty. That's how it is, that's all. Wasn't it Horace himself who wrote, The youth is gamy as a buck, the maiden's fragrance blossoms as does the white narcissus. And the Romans knew all about that. The odor of humans is always a fleshly odor, that is, a sinful odor. How could an infant which does not yet know sin, even in its dreams, have an odor? How could it smell? Poopy doo, not a chance of it. He had placed the basket back on his knees and now rocked it gently. The babe still slept soundly. Its right fist, small and red, stuck out from under the cover and now and then twitched sweetly against his cheek. Terrier smiled and suddenly felt very cozy. For a moment he allowed himself the fantastic thought that he was the father of the child. He had not become a monk, but rather a normal citizen, an upstanding craftsman, perhaps. Had taken a wife, a warm wife, fragrant with milk and wool, and had produced a son with her, and he was rocking him here now on his own knees, his own child. Poo 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 poopy doo. The thought of it made him feel good. There was something so normal and right about the idea. A father rocking his son on his knees, poopy doo, a vision as old as the world itself, and yet always new and normal. As long as the world would exist, ah yes, Terrier felt his heart glow with sentimental coziness. Then the child awoke. Its nose awoke first. The tiny nose moved, pushed upward, and sniffed. It sucked air in and snorted it back out in short puffs, like an imperfect sneeze. Then the nose wrinkled up, and the child opened its eyes. The eyes were of an uncertain color, between oyster gray and creamy opal white, covered with a kind of slimy film, and apparently not very well adapted for sight. Terrier had the impression that they did not even perceive him. But not so the nose. While the child's dull eyes squinted into the void, the nose seemed to fix on a particular target, and Terrier had the very odd feeling that he himself, his person, Father Terrier, was that target. The tiny wings of flesh around the two tiny holes in the child's face swelled like a bud opening to bloom, or rather like the cups of that small meat-eating plant that was kept in the Royal Botanical Gardens. And like the plant, they seemed to create an airy suction. It seemed to Terrier as if the child saw him with its nostrils, as if it were staring intently at him, scrutinizing him more piercingly than his eyes could ever do, as if it were using its nose to devour something whole, something that came from him, from Terrier, and that he could not hold that something back or hide it. The child with no smell was smelling at him shamelessly. That was it. It was establishing his scent. And all at once he felt as if he stank of sweat and vinegar, of chowcrout and unwashed clothes. He felt naked and ugly, as if someone were gaping at him while receiving nothing of himself, revealing nothing of himself, pardon. The child seemed to be smelling right through his skin, into his innards. His most tender emotions, his filthiest thoughts lay exposed to that greedy little nose, which wasn't even a proper nose, but only a pug of a nose, a tiny perforated organ, forever crinkling and puffing and quivering. Terrier shuddered. He felt sick to his stomach. He pulled back his own nose, as if he smelled something foul that he wanted nothing to do with. Gone was the homey thought that this might be his own flesh and blood. Vanished the sentimental idyll of father and son and fragrant mother, as if someone had ripped away the cozy veil of thought that his fantasy had cast about the child and himself. A strange, cold creature lay there on his knees, a hostile animal, and were he not a man by nature prudent, God-fearing, and given to reason, in the rush of nausea, he would have hurled it like a spider from him. Terrier wrenched himself to his feet and set the basket on the table. He wanted to get rid of the thing as quickly as possible, right away if possible, immediately if possible, and then it began to wail. It squinted up its eyes, gaped its gullet wide, and gave a screech so repulsively shrill that the blood in Terrier's veins congealed. He shook the basket with an outstretched hand and shouted, "Poopy doo!" to silence the child, but it only bellowed more loudly and turned completely blue in the face and looked as if it would burst from bellowing. Away with it, thought Terrier. Away this very instant with this. He was about to say devil, but caught himself and refrained. Away with this monster, with this insufferable child. But away where? He knew a dozen. No, I sound like what's his name? Keith Morrison. But away where? He knew a dozen wet nurses and orphanages in the neighborhood, but that was too near, too close for comfort. Get the thing farther away, so far away that you couldn't hear it, so far away that it could not be dropped on your doorstep again every hour or so. If possible, it must be taken to another parish. On the other side of the river would be even better, and best of all, extra muros in the Faubourg Saint Antoine. That was it. That was the place for the screaming brat, far off to the east, beyond the Bastille, where at night the city gates were locked. And he hitched up his cassock and grabbed the bellowing basket and ran off, ran through the tangle of alleys to the Rue du Faubourg Saint Antoine, eastward up the Seine, out of the city, far, far out, the Rue des Charons. I don't know how to say it. I'm going to pretend I know. Almost to its very end, we're at an address near the cloister of Madeleine de Trenel. He knew there lived a certain Madame Gaillard, who took children to board no matter of what age or sort, as long as someone paid for them, and there he handed over the child, still screaming, paid a year in advance, and fled back into the city. And once at the cloister cast his clothes from him as if they were foully soiled, washed himself from head to foot, and crept into bed in his cell, crossing himself repeatedly, praying long, and finally, with some relief, falling asleep. See how long this next one isn't too long. Madame Gaillard's life already lay behind her, though she was not yet 30 years old. To the world she looked as old as her years, and at the same time 2, 3, 100 times older, like the mummy of a young girl. But on the inside she was long since dead. When she was a child, her father had struck her across the forehead with a poker just above the base of the nose, and she had lost for good all sense of smell and every sense of human warmth and human coldness, indeed, every human passion. With that one blow, tenderness had become as foreign to her as enmity, joy as strange as despair. She felt nothing when later she slept with a man, and just as little when she bore her children. She did not grieve over those that died, nor rejoice over those that remained to her. When her husband beat her, she did not flinch, and she felt no sense of relief when he died of cholera in the Hotel Dieu. The only two sensations that she was aware of were a very slight depression at the approach of her monthly migraine and a very slight elevation of mood at its departure. Otherwise, this numbed woman felt nothing. On the other hand, or perhaps precisely because of her total lack of emotion, Madame Gaillard had a merciless sense of order and justice. She showed no preference for any one of the children entrusted to her, nor discriminated against any one of them. She served up 3 meals a day and not the tiniest snack more. She diapered the little ones 3 times a day, but only until their second birthday. Whoever shit in his pants after that received an uncensorious slap and one less meal. Exactly one half of the boarding fees were spent for her wards. Exactly one half she retained for herself. She did not attempt to increase her profits when prices went down, and in hard times she did not charge a single soul extra, even when it was a matter of life and death. Otherwise, her business would have been of no value to her. She needed the money. She had figured it down to the penny. In her old age, she wanted to buy an annuity with just enough beyond that, so that she could afford to die at home rather than perish miserably in the Hotel Dieu as her husband had. The death itself had left her cold. But she needed the communal public death among hundreds of strangers. She wanted to afford a private death. And for that, she needed her full cut of the boarding fees. True, there were winners when 3 or 4 of her 2 dozen little boarders died. Still, her record was considerably better than that of most other private foster mothers, and surpassed by far the record of the great public and ecclesiastical orphanages, where the losses often came to 9 out of 10. There were plenty of replacements. Paris produced over 10,000 Newfoundlands, bastards, and orphans a year. Several such losses were quite affordable. For little Granule, Madame Gallard's establishment was a blessing. He probably could not have survived anywhere else. But here, with this small-souled woman, he throve. He had a tough constitution. Whoever has survived his own birth in a garbage can is not so easily shoved back out of this world again. He could eat watery soup for days on end. He managed on the thinnest milk, digested the rottenest vegetables, and spoiled meat. In the course of his childhood, he survived the measles, dysentery, chickenpox, cholera, a 20-foot fall into a well, and a scalding with boiling water poured over his chest. True, he bore scars and chafings and scabs from it all, and the slightly crippled the foot left him with a limp, but he lived. He was as tough as a resistant bacterium and as content as a tick sitting quietly on a tree and living off a tiny drop of blood plundered years before. He required a minimum ration of food and clothing for his body. For his soul, he required nothing. Security, attention, tenderness, love, or whatever all those things are called that children are said to require, were totally dispensable for the young Grenouille. I probably shouldn't learn to say that name. Grenouille. I'll just say Grenouille. Or rather, so it seems to us, he had totally dispensed with them just to go on living from the very start. The cry that followed his birth, the cry with which he had brought himself to people's attention, and his mother to the gallows was not an instinctive cry for sympathy and love. That cry, emitted upon careful consideration, one might almost say upon mature consideration, was the newborn's decision and against love and nevertheless for life. Under the circumstances, the latter was possible only without the former, and had the child demanded both, it would doubtless have abruptly come to a grisly end. Of course, it could have grabbed the other possibility open to it and held its peace, and thus have chosen the path from birth to death without a detour by way of life, sparing itself and the world a great deal of mischief. But to have made such a modest exit without have but to have made such a modest exit would have demanded a modicum of native civility, and that Grenouille did not possess. He was an abomination from the start. He decided in favor of life out of sheer spite and sheer malice. Let me see how you say this name. Gren. O-I-L-E. Grenouille, perfume. Oh, there was a perfume called Grenouille. Frog. That means frog, Grenouille. Let's see how you say it. How do you pronounce Grenouille? Oh my God. Who the hell can pronounce that? What does that say? Granou? Granou? The French word meaning frog. Let's see, pronunciation of Grenouille. 42. Hello, this is that one guy, isn't it?
Not a traditional cafe. We're completely unconventional, and my Wix website really has to capture the same.
Bonjour.
That is that
We
guy.
are looking at how to say a frog in French. We'll be looking at how to say more French vocabulary as well. How do you say it? Grenouille. Grenouille.
Grenouille.
Nouille. So I-double-L is like a Y, really. Grenouille is how you say a frog in French. And now you know, do you like frogs? Do you like eating them? I kind of like them, but we French don't eat them very often at all. It's just a myth. Grenouille. More videos for you here to learn.
Grenouille.
Nouille. Nouille. So
Grenouille.
I-double-L is like a Y, really. Grenouille is how you say
Grenouille.
a frog.
Grenouille. All right, Grenouille. Obviously, he did not decide this as an adult would decide, who requires his more or less substantial experience and reason to choose among various options. Grenouille. But he did decide vegetatively, as a bean, when once tossed aside, must decide if it ought to germinate or had better let things be. Or like that tick in the tree, for which life has nothing better to offer than perpetual hibernation, the ugly little tick which, by rolling its blue-gray body up into a ball, offers the least possible surface to the world, which, by making its skin smooth and dense, emits nothing, lets not the tiniest bit of perspiration escape. The tick, which makes itself extra small and inconspicuous so that no one will see it and step on it, the lonely tick which, wrapped up in itself, huddles in its trees, blind, deaf, and dumb, and simply sniffs all year long for miles around for the blood of some passing animal that it could never reach on its own power. The tick could let itself drop. It could fall to the floor of the forest and creep a millimeter or two here or there on its 6 tiny legs and lie down to die under the leaves. It would be no great loss, God knows. But the tick, stubborn, sullen, and loathsome, huddles there and lives and waits for that more improbable of chances that will bring blood in animal form directly beneath its tree, and only then does it abandon caution and drop and scratch and bore and bite into that alien flesh. The young granule
In French. And now you know, do you like frogs? A Y, really? Nouille. So I-double-L is like a Y, really?
Grenouille.
Nouille. Nouille.
Grenouille.
Nouille. So I-double-L is like a Y, really? Grenouille.
Granuia. Granuia. The young Granuia was such a tick. He lived encapsulated in himself and waited for better times. He gave the world nothing but his dung. No smile, no cry, no glimmer in the eye, not even his own scent. Every other woman would have kicked this monstrous child out. But not Madame Gaillard. And then maybe I should look that up too. Canulia. She could not smell that he did not smell, and she expected no stirrings from his soul, because her own was sealed tight. The other children, however, sensed at once what Granulia was about. From the first day, the new arrival gave them the creeps. They avoided the box in which he lay, and edged closer together in their beds as if it had grown colder in the room. The younger ones would sometimes cry out in the night. They felt a draft sweep through the room. Others dreamed something was taking their breath away. One day the older ones conspired to suffocate him. They piled rags and blankets and straw over his face, and weighted all down with bricks. When Madame Gaillard dug him out the next morning, he was crumpled and squashed and blue, but not dead. They tried it a couple of times more, but in vain. Simple strangulation using their bare hands, or stopping up his mouth and nose, would have been a dependable method, but they did not dare try it. They didn't want to touch him. He disguised them. He disgusted them the way a fat spider that you can't bring yourself to crush in your own hand disgusts you. As he grew older, they gave up their attempted murder. They probably realized that he could not be destroyed. Instead, they stayed out of his way, ran off, or at least avoided touching him. They did not hate him. They weren't jealous of him either, nor did they begrudge him the food he ate. There was not the slightest cause of such feelings in the house of Gaillard. It simply disturbed them that he was there. They could not stand the non-smell of him. They were afraid of him. And we shall stop there. Granulia.
Nuia. So I
Granulia.
Nuia.
Granulia. Granulia. All right. Granulia it is. She won't let me in. That's going to be all.